Eternity, Prayer Demands by Paramahansa Yogananda. This is prayer demand number 21. Prayer demand to the holy vibration for omnipresence. O holy vibration, boom on the shores of my consciousness. Break the limiting boundary of my body consciousness. Reverberate through my body, mind, and soul, through my surroundings, through all the cities and lands of this earth, through all the planets, throughout the universe, and every atom particle of creation. Unite my consciousness with thy cosmic consciousness. Boy, it's good to have all of you to come back to. For those of you who don't know, I've just been away for 3 weeks. 2.5 of those weeks were spent in seclusion. As I say it, it doesn't sound like very long, but when you're sitting there alone, just you and God, and in silence the whole time, time really slows down. And it's complicated. It's can be, and this was very deep, very revealing, sometimes good, sometimes not so good, but nonetheless very revealing. And coming back is challenging. I was listening to a talk that Swami Kriyananda gave, not really a talk, but he did a series when he was in India. I don't know what year it was, but it was not that long before he left his body, called Ask Me About Truth. And it was a series of questions that Dharma Das and Nirmala, who were there at the time, put together for him. They did a very great job of interviewing him. And one of them was on Paramahansa Yogananda's phrase, seclusion is the price of greatness. It's an interesting statement, but he made it several times, and they were asking Swamiji about that. And in the course of that little talk, Swamiji said, I've always made it a habit to go away into seclusion at least 2 weeks a year. And he said, I think people should do that. And then they asked him about coming back. Is it hard to come back, Swamiji? Now, I'm not professing to go where Swamiji went on his seclusions, but nonetheless, his answer was, it surprised me. He said, and later I thought about it, what a perfect word, but he said, it's shattering. It's just shattering. And the way we're used to using it, holds so much power and violence. But really, when we compare that place that we've just spent so much, no, I haven't spent effort, but surrendered into, I would say, and removed ourselves from all of what goes on in the course of a usual day or weeks, the constant bombardment from the outside in and the need to respond and react to it, it's huge. We get so used to it until we're in total silence, we can actually forget, and particularly those of us who have this extraordinary blessing of being part of a spiritual community. What we're doing all the time is so uplifting. It's so much about God. It makes it even easier to forget how stimulating it is and to find that time for ourselves. Even if we start with hours in a week or a half a day in a week, whatever we can start with, and just remove all of that extraneous input so that we can really begin to look at seclusion was such, I should say this reading was such a perfect way to come out of seclusion. How high should we aspire? I thought, boy, that's one of the better rhetorical questions I think I've ever heard. What a great Swamiji, what a great thing Swamiji did. What would any of us say? Here we all are on a spiritual path. Would we say, I'll just do a little bit? I'm just going to go this far and not that? Like the story of looking at the mountain that Master's told so many times. He sees people looking behind him. They'll go up and then they shake their head no and walk away. And finally, as he turns, he sees this huge mountain. It's such a perfect analogy for this lesson. And at first, this isn't Master, but whoever he's telling the story about, the person in the story says, I can't climb that mountain. That mountain's way too tall for me, just like everybody who that person had watched looking at it. And then the thought comes, one step at a time. We'll climb it one step at a time. So when we ask this question, how high should we aspire? Well, of course, we're aspiring to get to the top of the mountain. And what does that really mean? That means perfect attunement with divine will. That means entering into that state of perfect Christ consciousness, of realizing that truth eternal. We are one with that, but here we are, and there it is. And I'm going to talk about the mountain in just a little bit, but that's where we're all headed. We'll all get there in our own time and in our own way, because there are as many paths up that mountain as there are souls hoping to climb it. And that turns out to be so important, so meaningful for each of us. But I want to back up before I go there. The morning that I left, Monday morning, was a beautiful morning. And for those of you who have ever taken this drive, you go over a road called 152. It connects 101 and Route 5, if you're going that way. It's an exquisite ride. It takes you through these beautiful mountains. And it was just like that weekend where all of the hills were that bright green of spring. You know, we have that for about a week in California. Then it gets hot and it starts browning, but it was so beautiful. It was just uplifting. I felt like I was being uplifted to be delivered into this seclusion. And I want to say, I felt called to this seclusion. I had this distinct feeling that I was not running away from anything. It wasn't like, oh, I got to get out of here. I've been working so hard. It wasn't that. It was come into something wonderful, is what it felt like. It had been feeling that way for weeks. That's where my expectation was. And expectation's an important word, but then I go through these green mountains and I'm talking to God and I'm saying, yes, you know, you're carrying me there. I mean, it was surreal. And then you drive through that beautiful reservoir. I'm blocking on the name of it right now. But it's really a spectacular part of California. And it was the perfect day. And then I make that sweeping turn onto Route 5. And I say to myself, yay, we're on vacation. And then I catch it. I mean, it's in my mind. I didn't say it out loud. I said, you're not on vacation. this isn't a vacation. But then those little voices are back there. We're going on a vacation. It is. And it's like, the beach. And I'm saying, no, that's not what's happening. Thus ended the earlier part, the weeks of leading up to that beautiful ride over 152. And I entered the truth, the realization, the experience of life being a battlefield, of what it means to be so bound to ego. My expectation of my time was that I would do these very long meditations. I would sit for hours. It's always dangerous to say how many hours, because it's not a good thing, because if people are truly meditating deeply for 10 minutes, that's beautiful. So time doesn't really matter, but I was expecting beautiful, deep, long, thirsty, guru-given meditations. And I get there and I get settled, and I can't meditate. I can't meditate. I'm meditating much longer, 3 times longer at home than I was able to do those first days there. My whole plan, my will, not thy will. And it was not in tune with what it was that Master and the gurus had in store for me. They were calling me. They were. I believe it. I felt it. But they weren't calling me to what I thought should happen. They were calling me to what they knew had to happen. The essence of this reading is to really get to that place of knowing that God is the doer. God really is always the doer. And all that keeps us from that is all of the hold that the ego has on us. I decided, because meditation was so hard at first, I said to myself, now asking God and gurus as well, what should I do? What do I do here? And it came to me that whatever I did for the next 2.5 weeks, it would be only about God, to the best of my ability. I wouldn't read a word, I wouldn't listen to a note of music, I wouldn't watch a movie, I wouldn't do anything that wasn't about God, that wasn't uplifting. No matter what happened with meditation, that I would do anything and everything I could do to put myself in a position to be uplifted. And the first lesson came because I did that. That's what the time was for me. Although, fortunately, the more I did that, the more I was able to meditate. But constantly, and I mean that, this is not hyperbole, wherever I went, if I went out for a long walk, which I did almost every day, I had Swamiji playing in my ears. I listened to talk after talk after talk. Sometimes I couldn't even tell you what the talk was about soon after it finished, but his vibration was with me. I was with him constantly. If I wasn't listening to him, I had my blessed little Om player with me that just continuously, for the rest of my life, could play Swamiji chanting Om for me. And it was plugged in. So it was constantly either his vibration or at times talks from masters that I listened to, or music. And I watched movies 8 movies that were so extraordinary about one saint after another after another. Now, and I also took on the task, the joy, as it turns out, of reading God Alone, front cover to back, and then reading it a second time and taking meticulous notes on it. For those of you who don't know, God Alone is a book of letters from Sister Gyanamata, a very highly evolved disciple of Masters, a true saint in her own right. Her letters to him, his letters to her, which are deeply moving, her letters to all of the disciples. Master asked her, answered their questions. He said, "You I trust totally to share these teachings as I would." So I read the book, and I read it a second time, and I took notes, tablets of notes, just as a way of bringing it all in. And every time I ran into a wall, the wall was, look at what you're doing. You're wasting your time. You know you can't experience God by reading. You know it's not going to come through a talk. That it would be like that. You are not doing this right. Now you're down to 14 days. Now you're down to 12 days. This is what my head was telling me. Anytime that happened, something would come in minutes. So this restlessness that had me, which totally surprised me, totally shocked me. And I would be condemning myself. This was within the first few days. Then I would put on the next talk from Swamiji. And Swamiji would say, you know, there was a time when this is Swamiji, I was so restless, I couldn't meditate. So I went to Master. And Master said, when you're that restless, back off. Don't meditate. Just let it go, or meditate for minutes. Let your soul have a rest. Let it find its way again. Swamiji got restless. He actually spoke to Master about it. I mean, it was so incredible to me. Then the first time these messages start coming through my head, you know you can't find God reading. You could copy the whole book, God Alone. That's not how you find God. Then the next paragraph or chapter, Sister Gyanamata would be saying, you can't ultimately get to God. There's no teaching, there's no technique that's going to take the place of the effort that the devotee makes. And you won't get there through these readings. But if you use them as a meditation, and if they're always and only about saints, these are her words, then you will be making great spiritual progress. No matter where I went to find what I was doing wrong, very much like what Viveka Devi was talking about in the fire ceremony this morning, for those of you who were there, Master just jumped right in. Swamiji jumped in. I felt, let me tell you first of all, it was way better to be with them than with myself. Way better. It was being made perfectly clear to me. This mind was not a good place to be. Their loving presence was perfect. And then what I started to realize is that any thought that I had, that I held up to God, was purified in God's presence. That's what happened. I couldn't change my mind. But if I offered it to God, it was purified and it was delivered back to me as a divine blessing. over and over and over, until as time went by, I started having that experience of having offered so much to God. Just a simple act. This is why I'm sharing with you. I was struggling, but as long as I offered that struggle to God, as long as I remembered, as long as it became a habitual practice, a habitual way of living while I was there, and not a morning or evening practice, then, in spite of myself, I was with God. I realized, and I use that word consciously and thoughtfully, God is right there. No matter what I did, He wasn't going to leave me. He can't leave me. This is a pure manifestation of that energy. And there is no room to judge ourselves. I was very impressed with how many talks of Swamiji's on any number of topics, and every number of topics. We have a lot of his talks. He starts out by reminding us that we are predisposed to behave badly. We are predisposed to get stuck. We come in with an ego, right? The soul, as soon as it enters, the soul identified with the body is the ego. So right from the beginning, all of our energy flows out. That's our introduction into the world. I thought to myself, of course he says it over and over. We have so much to learn at the beginning that we just keep going out. I mean, we spend the first 4 to 6 months of our life thinking everything depends on how to get our fist or our toes into our mouth. You know, it's not exactly an uplifted entry, really, in a way. It's very out there, and that's what happens. And it is very hard to let go of those long-held beliefs which we begin to identify as ourselves. And Swamiji says, he says to, I don't know if this is an exact quote, but it's close enough. He said, to achieve that transcendental release from egoic attachment, he said, takes persistent and sincere, impersonal perseverance towards truth, towards that which is always there, which is the pole star. The top of the mountain is always the top of the mountain. It's always where truth resides. That truth is eternal, unchanging. That's where we're headed. But we can't get there until we begin to develop this realization that we're not doing it. It's our path. We have to put out great effort, but without God's grace, we can't do any of it. And we can't have God's grace without putting out the effort, opening our hearts, becoming receptive, being devotional. So many people ask, what does that mean? Sing your heart out, chant your heart out. I mean, pray. Just keep opening your heart so that you can receive God's love, His guidance, and His grace, because we can't make it there otherwise. Sister Gyanamata, forgive me for quoting her so much, but you heard, I just rewrote the book. She did say some pretty great things, so fair enough. But she says, these divine blessings are not commonplace. Divine blessings means when you're sitting there beating yourself up and you listen to Swamiji say to you, don't do that, Shanti. That's not the way. Or Master says, no, you don't have to do that. I'm right here. They're extraordinary. She says they're not commonplace. Divine blessings are extraordinary, and it is our duty to open our hearts and receive them. So beautifully said. That's what we're doing. We're not here. We all have the same mountain to climb. We all have our own paths to climb it. We can only do it in our own time and in our own way. And there's going to be a lot of detours. I was thinking about, because I've done so much actual trekking and climbing of mountains, not mountain climbing, but walking to the top of many mountains. It's unbelievable the problems that can come up. You're down here, you're looking up at this beautiful mountain, you think, yeah, it's going to be a little effort, and you're just going to walk up there. No, it's not what happens. You find places that are impassable. You start to go down to get around them, and you come to a huge, what do they call it? A crevasse, and you can't get across it. So you're exhausted. You've been hiking for hours. Now you have to go back up and back down and around detours. This is what happens on the path. So what? We know where we're going. And when we do it, and we realize that we're doing it with God's help, it's the only way. We just keep our eye on the goal, and we do everything we can to not get down on ourselves, to not criticize ourselves. I had to do that a lot, to be reminded of this. Swamiji says, do not identify with your mistakes. Never tell yourself you're bad, you're wrong, you're not enough, you're dark. Don't do that. You are not your mistakes. Viveka Devi said it today. It's the truth. We're not our shortcomings. We are big, beautiful manifestations of pure divine energy, just finding our way back to that, again, perfect attunement with God. And we just keep going, moment by moment. I told you that I watched 8 movies, and there were such beautiful lessons in every one of them. Every one of these movies was just spectacular. But I watched this movie called, it's an old movie, so maybe many of you have seen it. I never heard of it. It's called The Dreamer. And it's a story about a young girl, it's a true story, long story, who loves a thoroughbred horse that they have that races. The horse breaks its leg very badly, and she desperately, and you see her growing into the strength of it, the conviction of it, the divine inspiration of it. This young child acts this so beautifully. She wants to retrain this horse, and every adult and everybody who's been with horses all their lives is telling her it's impossible. But she believes it's possible. And at one point, her mother and father are speaking, and her father says, it's impossible, she can't do it. Angry, he's yelling it. And the mother just looks at him, and she says to him, so what? So what? Let her try. Let her bring everything that she has to this moment. Let her learn that lesson of what it means, how much, my words now, not her words, God loves our courage, even if it ends in failure. It can't really be failure, because what we learn as we move towards our goal. And the mother just captures that so beautifully in that sentence. And I'm not going to tell you the end of the story, you can watch it, but it's a beautiful story just filled with those true spiritual lessons, the same lessons that were coming to me in this way. Who was even choosing the movies? I would Google movies only about spirituality. Who would choose them? Was I the chooser, or was God choosing them for me? At one point, I said, Master, can you please show me, how do I remember you every moment? How do I get to that place that I never, it's not just forget you, it's come to that place with you. That is our goal, deep, pure, inner communion with Christ consciousness. That's where we're headed. How do I do that? Up pops on my screen, the saint of 9/11. Again, nothing I'd ever seen. The life, a documentary of a Franciscan monk, Father Michael Judge was his name, and his life in New York City. A beautiful, truly magnificent life lived, where he never, ever, it never dawned on him to make a move without tuning in. There was no Father Michael there. He was so present and doing such beautiful work that you never felt his personality. He had it, he was magnetic, he was charismatic, but it was all God coming through. It was so beautiful to watch. And I'll share one more story with you. I was reading something that Nayaswami Maria from the village had written to the Kriya website. I don't remember even when or what it was about. But she said it came, it could have been recent or it could have been old. I'm sure some of you saw it. She said, in my meditation this morning, the thought came, she said, what is the path from technique to, what is the path from technique to, I don't think she used the word expansion, but let's just say that was the word. What's the path? The thought came to her. And then she said, but we were giving Sunday service, and I didn't have time to meditate on it. So I put it away. Later I came back, she said, I meditated on it, and here's what I came to. The answer that she came up with, which was beautiful, is not, she didn't come up with it, it came to her. But it's not the point. It struck me that she said, but I didn't have time to meditate on it. She didn't say, I thought about it all the way to Sunday service, or I decided to think about it when I came back, or none of that. It didn't even dawn on her. She has been practicing the presence of God for so many years, just moment after moment. This is the point that I want to make. We don't limit ourselves on our journey because it looks too hard or too high. We are taking our next step, and our next step can be as little or as big, just a tiny little switch. It can be, I'll meditate for 5 minutes every night now before I go to bed, or it can be, it could be any number of things. It could be monumental, or it can be almost infinitesimal. It's our next step. This is what we need to do. It's our intention. God loves our intention and our courage and our conviction. Master said an amazing thing that I just read. He said, every soul has their particular problem, or he didn't use the word excuse, but it was like that. He said, God doesn't pay any attention to that. He doesn't give you any room for that. It doesn't matter what's in our way. We all have stuff in our way. The hike is hard. Swamiji called the spiritual path an obstacle course. That's what he said. He didn't say it's like an obstacle. He said the spiritual path is an obstacle course. Okay, that's good to know. At least we know what we're setting out for, to get from wherever we are to that extraordinary place of remembering God is the doer. God is always here. This is my new practice, habit, as many times as I can remember. What do you think about this? Because I just lived it. I know it to be true. God would not let me get in my own way. He would not let me veer totally off the path. He had his loving arms around me. And this isn't just me. This is us. I've told all of you, I was thinking a lot about this before I went away. Dunbar has said to me, now I think 20 years ago, whenever any one of us has a deep seclusion, we all benefit from that seclusion. And here's what I saw, besides all of what I've shared with you. Any moment that I could, not seconds or minutes, this is important, any moment where I could let even a sliver of light in, but pure light, where I could reach that and see that pure light, just for a moment, what I realized is that it enlightened the entire moment. It was filled with life. It was all-pervading. It was a blessed light. And it was, in that instant, all that was there. God will not forsake us, ever. He doesn't see us as we see ourselves, and he's doing all he can. That's why I was so incredibly moved by our fire ceremony and by Viveka Devi's words this morning. I wish that had been recorded, and we don't record that fire ceremony. But when you listen to the words of the fire ceremony, you know, we say it so many times, open your hearts to me, and I will enter and take charge of your life. That is our sole goal. Just keep opening your hearts, because eventually, no matter how much you tried to get in the way, no matter how many bad habits jumped up, no matter how many times it looks like we're still looking for our fists or our toes, it looks so elemental. No matter how much that goes on, God waits till there is that crack, that moment where we forget ourselves, and that light comes in. And then once you've had it, you've had it. You know it. You know exactly where you're going. It makes it so much easier the next time and the next time. And then it's not just for a moment, then it really is for a second or seconds. And it just goes that way. We see our goal with greater and greater clarity. And the goal, the top of the mountain, is right here. It's right here. It's a climb. It is. Nobody, not Master, not Swamiji, nobody. Master says, whatever excuse you have, forget it. I'm not listening to it. No, he won't honor that in us. It's like we keep going. As long as we keep going, this is not an invitation to step off the path for a while. If you step off the path, you're off the path. But if you stay on the path, we have so much help, so much love, so much guidance, supporting us, redirecting us, leading us. We can't lose. Master himself said, no devotee that comes with wholehearted dedication to finding this path will ever not succeed. I said that backward. Can't be unsuccessful. His words, they were almost exactly like that, but it can't be. We can't not win. We just have to stay on the path. And remember, in every moment, he's right there. He's watching us, he's loving us, he's going to step in and correct us, and we have to listen. And then we hear, and then we receive. Bless you all.
All your children, mother, call you, knowing not it's you they call. Some through mists of their unknowing, bruised and hurting when they fall. Turn away, but who can leave you? You, the mother of us all. If the child forgets its mother, will she coldly turn away? Wise or foolish, we're your children. Guide us, Mother, if we stray. Those whose hearts are torn with anguish lack the power your name to call. Heal their wounds, Ma, soothe their sorrows. You, the mother of us all. Heal their wounds, Ma, soothe their sorrows. You,